At Morixa Tales, we believe in the power of storytelling. Our scripts weave together deep emotions and dramatic turns to deliver justice where it is most needed. Experience captivating mysteries where the truth eventually shines through, leaving a lasting impact on your heart and mind.
At Thanksgiving dinner, while my husband's family raised their glasses to celebrate his promotion, I sat at the far end of the table like always, silent, invisible, the failure they loved to joke about. My husband smirked and said loudly, "Don't tell me you're still wasting nights on that education project. Nobody in the real world pays money for a useless hobby like that." The whole table burst into mocking laughter, but a few minutes later, when an unexpected announcement appeared and everyone started reading it, the laughter died instantly, because in that moment they realized the thing they mocked for years was only the beginning. I'm incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time here. It means the world to me. So tell me, what city or country are you watching from right now? Leave a comment and let's connect. I'd love to know who's part of this journey. Just a heads up, this story blends some fictional elements with authentic life lessons for educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or places is unintentional, but the wisdom shared here is heartfelt and meaningful. My name is Harper Sinclair. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 8 years, my husband's family has treated me like a piece of furniture present, but never worth noticing. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as the November sky over Austin stretched gray and low, the kind of overcast morning that makes even the wealthiest neighborhoods look a little less polished. My Toyota Camry practical, reliable, nothing flashy rolled down the long driveway, lined with live oaks, their twisted branches heavy with Spanish moss. Ahead, the Thornton estate rose like a monument to old money-white stone columns, wrap-around porch manicured lawn, still green despite the season. It looked like something out of a Southern architecture magazine, the kind of house that said, "We've been here longer than you, and we'll be here long after you're gone." I parked near the side entrance, the spot I'd learned to claim over the years. Not too close to the front. God forbid I blocked the main driveway when Robert's business partners arrived, but not so far back that it looked like I was ashamed. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment staring at the house through the windshield. 8 years, 8 Thanksgivings, and I still felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I glanced at the passenger seat where a pumpkin pie sat in its store-bought box. The pie was my only contribution today. Not because I couldn't cook. I'd grown up watching my mother turn cheap cuts of meat into meals that stretched for days, but because Diane, my mother-in-law, had made it clear years ago that my help wasn't needed. "Oh, Harper, you don't have to bring anything," she'd said with that tight, dismissive smile. "We have everything handled," but she'd said it in a way that meant, "Don't even try." So I brought pie. Every year. The same bakery, the same flavor. It was safe. It was expected. And most importantly, it required nothing from them but a polite nod when I set it on the dessert table. I reached for the box and paused, catching my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark hair pulled back into a low bun, minimal makeup, a navy sweater, and black slacks. Nothing too bright, nothing too bold. I'd learned to dress like wallpaper in this family. Blend in. Don't stand out. Don't give them a reason to remember you're there. My phone buzzed. A text from Tristan, my husband, already here. Dad needed help moving the extra chairs. See you inside. Of course, he was already here. Tristan always went ahead, always found a reason to arrive early and leave me to make my own entrance. I used to think it was because he wanted to help. Now I knew better. It was easier for him to slip into his family without me by his side. No awkward questions. No need to defend the woman who didn't quite belong. I locked the car and walked toward the house, the pie balanced in my hands like an offering. The front door was already open, warm light spilling out onto the porch. Inside, I could hear voices, laughter, the clatter of dishes, Diane's high, precise tone, giving instructions. The Thornton family moved like a well-rehearsed play, everyone knowing their lines, their marks, their roles. And me, I was backstage crew, present but not part of the performance. As I stepped inside, I thought about the first time I'd walked through this door. It was the summer of 2017, 3 months after Tristan and I got engaged. We'd driven down from Dallas, where I was finishing my master's in school counseling, and Tristan was wrapping up his last year of law school. I was nervous, terrified actually, but hopeful. I wanted them to like me. I wanted to belong. I'd worn a yellow sundress, my best one, and brought flowers. Robert had shaken my hand with the kind of firm, assessing grip you give a job applicant. Diane had looked me up and down, smiled, and said, "Well, aren't you sweet?" Later that night, I'd overheard her talking to Robert in the kitchen. I'd gone to get a glass of water, and her voice had drifted through the half-open door. "He could have married someone from our world, Robert. Someone who understands what it means to be a Thornton." I'd frozen in the hallway, the glass cold in my hand. Robert's reply had been quieter, harder to hear, but the message was clear. She's not what we hoped for. I'd married Tristan anyway. I loved him, or at least I loved the version of him I thought I knew. The man who'd sat across from me in a coffee shop near campus, who'd listened to me talk about my dream of helping kids who felt invisible in the system, who'd told me I was the most grounded person he'd ever met. But somewhere between "I do" and now that man had faded, or maybe he'd never really been there at all. I worked as a guidance counselor at a public middle school in Austin, helping kids navigate everything from college applications to family crises. My parents had immigrated to the U.S. When I was 5, my father drove long-haul trucks, my mother cleaned houses, and I'd grown up understanding what it meant to work for every inch of ground you gained. The Thorntons didn't understand that. They didn't understand me. And they didn't know what I'd been building. For 5 years, I'd been working on something they couldn't see. Something quiet, something mine. They had no idea what I'd created in the margins of my life. The late nights after parent-teacher conferences. The weekends when Tristan thought I was grading papers. The savings I'd scraped together from a salary they considered cute. They didn't know, and tonight they would. I adjusted the pie in my hands and took a breath. The house smelled like roasted turkey and sage, like tradition and old money and certainty. I stepped into the foyer and no one looked up. Typical. I set the pie on the kitchen counter where Diane was orchestrating the final touches on the meal. She glanced at the box, nodded once, and turned back to her task without a word. I stood there for a moment invisible again. But tonight, that was going to change. When this evening ended, I would never walk through this door the same way again. The inside of the Thornton house always felt like a museum, beautiful, carefully curated, and entirely untouchable. I stepped into the foyer, the pie still balanced in my hands, and immediately felt the weight of the place settle over me. High ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than my annual salary. Everything was polished, pristine, perfect, and everything reminded me that I didn't belong. "Oh, Harper, there you are." Diane appeared from the hallway, her smile as tight and practiced as ever. She wore a silk blouse the color of champagne pearls at her throat, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She looked like she'd stepped out of a country club brochure. "Thank you for the pie, dear. Why don't you head into the kitchen? I could use an extra pair of hands. Not would you mind helping? Not I'd love your company, just a polite directive, the kind you'd give to hired help." "Of course," I said, matching her tone. "Where should I put this?" "Counter by the coffee maker is fine." She was already turning away, her attention shifting to the dining room, where I could hear the clink of crystal and the low murmur of early arriving guests. And Harper. "The hand towels in the guest bath need to be refolded. The edges aren't even." I nodded and made my way toward the kitchen, but not before passing through the living room. That's where I saw it. The family photos. They lined the mantel above the fireplace, a carefully arranged gallery of Thornton milestones. Tristan in his law school graduation gown shaking hands with the dean. Jessica at some charity gala wearing a sequined dress and a wide, confident smile. Robert and Diane at their 30th wedding anniversary, looking like they'd been carved from the same marble as the columns outside, and then tucked into the far right corner, barely visible, unless you were looking for it, our wedding photo. It was small, smaller than the others, and it was angled just slightly away as if it had been placed there out of obligation rather than pride. Tristan and I stood in front of a courthouse. We'd had a simple ceremony, nothing like the lavish affair Jessica would no doubt demand someday, and I was smiling, hopeful, holding a bouquet of daisies. Tristan's arm was around my waist, but even in the photo there was a distance in his eyes, like he was already somewhere else. I stared at it for a moment, then turned away. "Harper," I flinched. Jessica breezed into the room phone, in hand, her blonde hair cascading over one shoulder in perfect waves. She was 27, 3 years younger than Tristan, and she moved through the world like someone who'd never been told no. She worked in real estate luxury properties in downtown Austin and spent most of her time cultivating an Instagram presence that she referred to as her brand. "Hey, Jess," I said, forcing a smile. "Oh my God, you have to see this!" She turned her phone toward me, scrolling through her feed. 50,000 followers, can you believe it? I just hit it this morning. I'm thinking about doing a giveaway, maybe a consultation package or something. She looked up at me, her smile just a shade too bright. "You should totally start an account. You know, like tips from a school counselor or something. It could be cute." Cute. The word hung in the air between us, and I felt the familiar sting of condescension. Jessica didn't mean to be cruel, or maybe she did. I could never quite tell. But everything she said carried an undertone of, "You're trying and that's adorable, but you'll never be us." "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my voice even. "Harper." Diane's voice cut through the room. "The kitchen." I nodded and left Jessica scrolling through her comments, already lost in her digital kingdom. The kitchen was chaos in the most controlled way possible, caterers moving efficiently, trays of hors d'oeuvres being assembled, the scent of rosemary and butter thick in the air. I set the pie down and was immediately handed a stack of linen napkins to fold. I worked in silence, my hands moving on autopilot, while Diane orchestrated everything with the precision of a general commanding troops. That's when I heard Robert's voice. "Tristan, that case you closed last week, excellent work. This family is fortunate to have your legal mind." I glanced toward the doorway. Robert and Tristan stood in the hallway just outside the kitchen, Robert's hand on Tristan's shoulder in a rare display of paternal pride. My husband looked pleased, his posture relaxed in a way it never was around me anymore. "Thanks, Dad. It was a tough one, but we got the settlement we wanted. That's my boy." Robert's gaze shifted, and he finally noticed me standing at the counter. "Oh, Harper, you made it. Thanks for the dessert." It wasn't unkind, it was worse, it was dismissive, like I was a neighbor who'd dropped off a casserole, not his son's wife of 8 years. "Of course," I said, and went back to folding napkins. Tristan didn't even look at me. An hour later, I was carrying a tray of appetizers into the hallway when I heard Jessica's voice, low and tense, coming from the library. "I already told you the lawyer said we can't discuss it over the phone." I slowed, pretending to adjust the tray. "No, I know that, but—" Her voice was sharp, now strained. "Just let me handle it. Okay, I'll call you later." The line went dead, and I heard her exhale a long, frustrated breath. I kept walking, but not before catching a glimpse of her through the half-open door. Her face was tight, her hands gripping the phone like she wanted to throw it. Whatever that was about, it wasn't good. On my way back to the kitchen, I passed the hallway leading to Robert's study. That's where I saw it, a framed photograph on the wall older than the others, the edges slightly yellowed with age. It was Diane, but not the Diane I knew. In the photo, she couldn't have been more than 20. She was standing outside a diner wearing a waitress uniform polyester dress, white apron name tag pinned to her chest. She was smiling, but it was a tired smile, the kind that came from long shifts and low tips. I stared at it for a moment, my mind turning. Diane never talked about her past, never mentioned where she came from, and no one ever asked. Harper. I turned. Diane was standing at the end of the hall, her expression unreadable. "The guests are arriving. I need you to help with coats." "Of course," I said and followed her back toward the foyer. But as I hung up jackets and smiled at strangers, I overheard Diane talking to one of the guests, a woman in a fur stole who smelled like expensive perfume. Tristan married for love, not status. Diane was saying, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she reserved for outsiders. Though, of course, Harper's humble background wasn't quite what we'd envisioned. My hand tightened on the coat hanger. 8 years. 8 years of this. But what they didn't know could fill this entire house. I stood at the counter, chopping celery for the stuffing, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board, filling the otherwise silent kitchen. The caterers had moved to the dining room, and for a brief moment, I was alone with my thoughts. My hands moved on autopilot, but my mind drifted. Out the kitchen window, I could see the guest house at the back of the property. It was small, maybe 800 square feet, but charming with white shutters and a stone pathway leading to the door. The lights were on inside a warm glow spilling out into the late morning gray. Jessica's lights. I stared at them and the memory rose unbidden, sharp and clear. Spring 2022. It had been a Saturday afternoon unseasonably warm for March. I'd driven to the Thornton estate alone. Tristan had stayed in the city for a golf outing with clients, and I'd rehearsed what I was going to say the entire way there. I found Robert in his study reading the Wall Street Journal and Diane in the sunroom arranging fresh-cut tulips in a crystal vase. "Harper," Diane said when I appeared in the doorway. She didn't look up. "What brings you by—" I took a breath. "I wanted to ask you both something." Robert lowered his paper. "Go ahead. I've been working on a project." I began choosing my words carefully. It's an education platform software that helps students who struggle with reading comprehension. I've been developing it for about 2 years now, and it's starting to gain some traction with a few schools in the Austin area. Diane set down the tulip she'd been arranging. "That's nice, dear." I pressed on. "The thing is, I've been working out of coffee shops and the public library, and it's getting harder to find quiet space to meet with developers and test the software. I was wondering if I could use the guest house a few hours a week, just to have a dedicated workspace. I'd pay for utilities, of course, and I'd make sure everything stayed clean and—" "No?" Diane's voice was firm, polite, but final. I blinked. "I'm sorry. The guest house is reserved for family and distinguished guests," she said, turning back to her flowers. "It wouldn't be appropriate to use it as an office, but it's not being used right now," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "It's just sitting empty." "That's not the point, Harper." Robert folded his newspaper and set it on the side table. His voice was measured the same tone he probably used in boardrooms. "This property is part of our family's legacy. The guest house has history. It's where Diane's mother stayed when she visited where we've hosted senators, business leaders. It's not a co-working space." I felt my cheeks flush. "I understand that. I'm not asking to turn it into anything permanent. Just a few hours a week." Diane finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Harper, you're a school teacher. You have summers off, evenings free. Why don't you work at a coffee shop? They have Wi-Fi. It's perfectly adequate." Adequate. The word landed like a slap. I just thought I started, but Diane cut me off. "You need to learn your place, dear." Her voice softened, but there was something cold beneath it. Like I once had to. I didn't know what she meant by that. I still don't, not entirely. But the message was clear. You don't belong here. Not really. I left that day without another word. 2 weeks later, I drove by the estate to drop off some documents Tristan had forgotten at our apartment. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Jessica's car parked in front of the guest house. I frowned and walked closer. Through the window, I could see her inside. She'd set up a ring light, a tripod, and a small backdrop. There were plants arranged on shelves, a velvet chair, angled just so, and a camera pointed at the center of the room. She was filming something, probably one of her Instagram videos. I stood there for a long moment, staring. Then I went to find Tristan. He was in the main house, sitting in the den with Robert watching a basketball game. "Can I talk to you?" I said, keeping my voice low. He glanced at me, then back at the TV. "Sure, what's up?" "Why is Jessica using the guest house?" He looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "I asked your parents 2 weeks ago if I could use it for my project, and they said no. But Jessica's in there right now filming Instagram content." Tristan sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Jess needed a space for her brand. Her apartment doesn't have good lighting. And my project doesn't matter. Harper, come on." He stood lowering his voice so his father wouldn't hear. "Jessica's Instagram actually makes money. She has sponsorships, partnerships. Your project it's a nice idea, but it's more of a hobby, right?" I stared at him. "A hobby. I've been working on this for 2 years, I said quietly. "I've built something real. I've partnered with schools. And that's great," Tristan said, his tone placating. "But you have to understand, Jess is family. My parents want to support her. It's different. I'm your wife." He looked uncomfortable. "I know, but you know how they are. Just let it go, okay?" I didn't let it go. I couldn't. But I also didn't fight. Because by then I'd learned that fighting with the Thorntons was like shouting into a void. They heard you, but they didn't listen. So I left, and I went back to the public library. Present day. I set the knife down and looked out the window again. The lights were still on in the guest house. Jessica was probably in there right now, staging another sponsored post, adjusting her ring light, checking her follower count. That hobby Tristan had dismissed. It was called Pathway. It was worth $180 million. And instead of working in their precious guest house, I'd spent 3 years building it at public library tables, staying until the staff kicked me out at 11 p.m.s. Writing code on a 7-year-old laptop, meeting with developers in coffee shops where the Wi-Fi cut out every 10 minutes. I'd done it alone. Without their help, without their space, without their belief. And tonight they were going to find out. Diane's words echoed in my mind. You need to learn your place. Like I once had to. I still didn't know what she'd meant by that. But I knew this much. I'd learned my place. And it was nowhere near theirs. They were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. The memory came to me as I stood at the sink rinsing lettuce for the salad. It had been 4 months ago. January 2025. It was 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, and I was in the small second bedroom of our apartment, the one I'd turned into a makeshift office. The room barely fit a desk, a bookshelf, and a folding chair, but it was mine. The door could close, the lock could turn, and for a few hours each night I could work without interruption. I'd spread the documents across the desk, the Pathway Series B funding proposal, 80 pages of market analysis, user growth projections, financial models, and testimonials from school districts. My co-founder Riley and I had spent 3 months refining it, and tomorrow morning I had a video call with a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Everything was ready, and then I heard it. A hissing sound, faint at first, then louder. I looked up from my laptop. Water was seeping through the wall behind the bookshelf. No. I jumped up, and in the seconds it took me to cross the room, the hissing turned into a roar. The drywall buckled, and suddenly water was pouring out, drenching the carpet, soaking the bottom shelf of books. Tristan, I screamed. He came running from the living room, still in his work clothes. Dress shirt, slacks, tie loosened. What the hell? The pipe burst. I was already grabbing papers off the desk, my hands shaking. Help me. He didn't hesitate. Shut off the main valve, I'll save what I can. I ran to the hallway closet, fumbling with the valve, while water continued to pour into the office. By the time I got it turned off, the floor was soaked, the bookshelf ruined, and half my office looked like a disaster zone. Tristan had grabbed everything off the desk, my laptop, the funding proposal stacks of printed emails, contracts, notes, and carried them into the living room, spreading them out on the coffee table and couch to dry. Is the laptop okay? He asked, setting it on a towel. I checked. The case had protected it. Yeah, it's fine. Good. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the mess. I'll call a plumber. The plumber arrived an hour later, a grizzled man in his 50s, who didn't say much beyond old building. Happens every winter. He worked for 2 hours, cutting into the drywall, replacing a section of frozen pipe that had cracked, and leaving us with a gaping hole in the wall and a bill for $800. By the time he left, it was nearly midnight. I stood in the doorway of the office, staring at the soaked carpet, the ruined books, the water stains on the walls. I felt exhausted, bone-tired in a way that went beyond physical. I have an early meeting tomorrow with the principal, I said quietly. I need to sleep. Tristan was still in the living room, surveying the papers he'd rescued. Go ahead. I'll clean up. I looked at him, surprised. Are you sure? Yeah, it's fine. Get some rest. I didn't argue. I was too tired. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and fell asleep within minutes. I didn't know what he did after I fell asleep. I didn't know until much later. But he didn't just clean up. He read. Harper's Reflection. Present day. I learned this later, pieced together from small details I hadn't noticed at the time. That night, after I'd gone to bed, Tristan sat in our living room, surrounded by the documents he'd pulled from the flood. And at some point, maybe out of curiosity, maybe because he was bored, maybe because he'd seen my name on the front page, he picked up the Pathway funding proposal. 80 pages. He read all of it. I know because 3 months later in April, I was organizing the documents into a binder when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a faint ring on page 15. A coffee stain. Starbucks, Pike Place, the dark roast Tristan ordered every morning. That stain hadn't been there before the pipe burst. I'd checked the proposal a dozen times before the flood. It had been pristine. But after, the ring was there, which meant he'd sat in our living room drinking coffee and read the entire thing. He'd seen the valuation, the user numbers, the school district partnerships, the projected revenue. My name at the top, CEO Harper Sinclair. He'd known. For 4 months he'd known, and he'd said nothing. The morning after January 2025. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee. Tristan was in the kitchen already dressed for work, his tie perfectly knotted. The papers from the night before were stacked neatly on the dining table, dried and organized. "Morning," he said, pouring me a cup. "I got everything sorted. Laptop's fine, all the papers are dry. You're good to go for your meeting." "Thank you." I picked up the stack, flipping through it quickly. Everything seemed to be there. "You didn't have to stay up." "It's fine." He smiled, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't read. "What are all those anyway?" I froze for half a second. "Grant paperwork," I said, keeping my voice casual. "For the school. We're applying for funding to expand the counseling program." He nodded like that made sense. "That's great. Hope you get it." "Thanks." He kissed me on the forehead and left for work. And I believed him. I believed he hadn't looked. I believed he didn't care. 2 weeks later, I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard Tristan on the phone in the hallway. His voice was low, but the walls in our apartment were thin. "Dad, can you send Jessica another 20,000 legal fees?" A pause. "I don't know all the details. She just said her lawyer needed a retainer." Another pause. "Yeah, I'll handle it, thanks." He hung up, and I stood there staring at the pile of clothes in my hands. $20,000. For Jessica. I thought about the guest house, about the way they'd dismissed my project, about the way Tristan had called it a hobby, and I thought about the pipe burst, about the papers spread across the living room, about the way he'd offered to clean up. But I pushed the thought away. I didn't know yet. I didn't know what he'd done. Present day. Thanksgiving morning. I set the lettuce in the colander and stared out the window at the guest house. 3 months after the flood, I found the coffee ring. Starbucks Pike Place. His usual order. He'd sat in our living room drinking coffee, reading the work of my entire life. And what he did next nearly destroyed everything. I was in my office at the school when the first email arrived. It was mid-August, 3 weeks into the new school year, and I was between meetings with students. My phone buzzed and I glanced at the screen. Subject Pathway Implementation. Delayed pending review. I opened it. Dear Mrs. Sinclair, after careful consideration and recent feedback from our Parent Advisory Board, Dallas ISD, has decided to pause the implementation of Pathway pending further review of data privacy protocols. We appreciate your partnership and will be in touch regarding next steps. I stared at the email, my stomach sinking. Dallas ISD was one of our largest contracts, 15 schools, over 8,000 students. We'd spent 6 months working with their administrators, training their staff, integrating our software into their systems. And now they were pausing. By the end of the week, 2 more schools had sent similar emails. Austin Westlake Academy, Round Rock Middle School. All citing the same vague reason, parent concerns about data privacy. I called Riley. Riley Bennett had been my best friend since college and was now Pathway's co-founder and CTO, Chief Technology Officer. A software engineer with a sharp mind and sharper instincts, Riley had been with me since the beginning, writing code at midnight in library study rooms, troubleshooting bugs over takeout, believing in this project when no one else did. "This doesn't make sense," Riley said, pacing across the small coffee shop where we'd agreed to meet. We sat in a corner booth, my laptop open between us, the emails pulled up on the screen. "Our data privacy protocols are airtight. We're FERPA compliant. We've passed third-party audits. We have encryption at every level. There's no legitimate reason for schools to be concerned." "Then why are they pulling out?" I asked. Riley frowned, scrolling through the emails. They all say the same thing. Parent concerns. Advisory board feedback. But none of them cite specific issues. It's like someone fed them a script. I felt a chill run through me. What if someone did? Riley looked up. "You think someone's sabotaging us?" I didn't answer right away. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. 3 schools, same week, same reason. That wasn't a coincidence. The next day, I got a call from Dr. Linda Ortiz, the principal at one of the Austin schools that had paused their contract. "Harper, I wanted to reach out personally," she said, her voice sympathetic. "I feel terrible about this. Your platform is incredible and our teachers love it." "Then why the pause?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated. "Someone contacted our school board about 3 weeks ago. They claimed to be a concerned parent and said Pathway had privacy issues, something about student data being shared with third parties. It wasn't true, of course, but the board felt they had to investigate." "Do you know who called?" "No, the person didn't leave a name, but we have a recording of the call. If you want, I can send it to you." "Please," I said. "I'd appreciate that." That afternoon, I sat in my car in the school parking lot and listened to the recording Dr. Ortiz had emailed me. The voice was male, calm, measured, professional. "I'm calling as a parent in your district. I've heard concerns about the Pathway software you're implementing. There are questions about how student data is being handled, whether it's being shared with third-party advertisers, whether consent protocols are being followed. I think the board should review this before moving forward." I played it again and again. There was something familiar about the cadence, the phrasing, but I couldn't place it. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Reyes, a former Dallas PD detective who now ran a small firm specializing in corporate investigations. I met him at a coffee shop in downtown Austin 2 days later. "Someone is sabotaging my company," I told him, sliding a folder across the table. 8 schools have canceled or paused contracts in the past 3 weeks, all citing the same reason: parent concerns about data privacy. But none of the concerns are real. I think someone is making fake calls posing as a parent. Marcus flipped through the folder, scanning the emails and the recording I'd received from Dr. Ortiz. "You think you know who it is?" he asked. "I have a suspicion," I said, "but I need proof." He nodded. "Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, we met again at the same coffee shop. This time, Marcus had a file of his own. "I traced the calls," he said, opening the folder. 8 schools received calls from the same phone number a burner prepaid purchased at a Target in North Austin. "Can you trace who bought it?" "The phone was paid for in cash," Marcus said. "But the buyer made a mistake. They used a rewards card to get the discount." He slid a receipt across the table. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. "Target red card, Tristan Thornton." I stared at the name, my husband's name. "That's him," I whispered. Marcus nodded. The schools that received the calls also saved recordings. I ran a voice analysis. The caller's voice matches 94% with audio samples from your husband's law firm podcast. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He called the schools, pretending to be a parent. "Yes." I looked up at Marcus. "Why would he do this?" Marcus leaned back, his expression hard. People like him, successful, confident, they often underestimate their targets. He wanted the red card points, 5% off rewards perks. He didn't think you were smart enough to trace a receipt. He paused. That arrogance, that's what gave him away. I sat there staring at the receipt, my mind racing. Tristan had sabotaged me, my own husband. Marcus slid a flash drive across the table. "I have the recordings, the receipt, the voice analysis. It's all here. If you want to pursue legal action—" "Not yet," I said quietly. He frowned. "You're not going to confront him." I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to finish something first." That night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Riley had sent me a message earlier. "Did you see Robert Thornton posted on LinkedIn about liquidating assets?" Weird, right? I pulled up Robert's profile. Sure enough, there it was, a vague corporate-sounding post about restructuring investments and streamlining holdings. I stared at it for a long moment. Liquidating assets. I filed that information away. Despite Tristan's sabotage, I closed the Series B funding round in late September. $45 million. It had taken everything I had: late-night calls with investors, damage control, with the school's proof of our security protocols, testimonials from districts that hadn't pulled out. But we did it, and I made one additional request to the lead investor: a media quiet period. No press releases, no TechCrunch articles, no public announcements until Thanksgiving. The investor had been confused. Why wait? This is a huge milestone. We should capitalize on the momentum. Trust me, I'd said. The timing matters. I didn't confront Tristan. I didn't tell him I knew. I let him think he'd won. Let him think his sabotage had worked, that I was scrambling, that Pathway was failing. But the truth would come when I was ready. And Thanksgiving, surrounded by his family in the house where I'd been invisible for 8 years, felt like the perfect time. By 11:30, the kitchen smelled like sage and butter and roasted garlic, and I could hear the low hum of laughter from the living room. Robert's booming voice, Diane's practiced trill, the clink of champagne flutes. I stood at the counter arranging sliced vegetables on a platter, my hands moving in the mechanical rhythm I'd learned over 8 Thanksgivings. Carrots, celery, cherry tomatoes. Keep them symmetrical. Keep them neat. Don't give Diane a reason to criticize. I thought about the quiet period. 3 weeks earlier, Riley and I had been sitting in a coffee shop near campus, laptops open, celebrating the close of the Series B round. $45 million, Riley said, shaking their head in disbelief. I still can't believe we pulled it off. We did more than pull it off, I said. We proved we're worth betting on. Riley grinned. So when do we announce TechCrunch, EdSurge, both? I hesitated and Riley's smile faded. What? They asked. I negotiated something with Sequoia, I said carefully. A media quiet period. No press releases, no public announcements until November 28th. Riley frowned. That's Thanksgiving. Exactly. Why? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. TechCrunch publishes their annual 50 most promising edtech startups list every Thanksgiving at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's one of the most read pieces of the year. I reached out to the editor 2 months ago and pitched Pathway. They loved it. We're going to be number 12 on the list. Riley stared at me. You coordinated the funding round to align with a TechCrunch article, and I coordinated the article to publish on Thanksgiving, I said, while I'm at Tristan's parents' house, while his entire family is there. Riley sat back, a slow smile spreading across their face. You've planned everything, every single detail. Present day. I set the vegetable platter on the counter and glanced toward the doorway. Diane appeared, her silk blouse immaculate, her pearls gleaming under the kitchen lights. She surveyed the food I'd arranged, the relish tray, the appetizers, the garnishes, and frowned. The presentation looks sloppy, she said, adjusting one of the celery sticks. This isn't a school cafeteria, Harper. I felt the familiar sting, but I kept my voice even. Yes, ma'am. She picked up the platter and carried it toward the dining room without another word. I exhaled slowly and turned back to the counter. A few minutes later, I heard Diane's voice drifting in from the living room. She was talking to one of the early arriving guests, a woman I didn't recognize, someone from Robert's business circle. Oh, it wasn't always like this. Diane was saying, her tone light but tinged with something else, something harder. I wasn't always this comfortable. I had to work my way up. You learn to navigate these circles. You learn what's expected. The woman murmured something in response, and Diane laughed, polite, controlled. I stood at the sink, rinsing my hands, and wondered what she meant by that. I thought about the photograph I'd seen in the hallway weeks ago. The young woman in the diner uniform, tired smile, name tag pinned to her chest. I had to work my way up. What did that mean? I was drying my hands when I heard Robert's voice in the hallway just outside the kitchen. Have you talked to the lawyer about Jessica's situation? I froze. Diane's reply was quieter, harder to hear. Not now, Robert. We need to address it before... Not now. There was a pause, and then I heard footsteps moving away. I stood there, towel in hand, my mind racing. Jessica's situation. The phone call I'd overheard in Task 2. The $20,000 Tristan had asked Robert to send. The tension in Jessica's voice when I'd seen her on the phone in the library. What had she done? I was setting out the bread rolls when Tristan walked into the kitchen. Hey, he said, leaning against the counter. He looked relaxed, confident. His tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Thanks for coming early to help. I know my mom can be a lot. It's fine, I said, arranging the rolls in a basket. Dad wants to make a toast later, Tristan said, his voice casual. I just found out this morning I'm being put on partner track. They're making the announcement official after the new year. I looked up at him. That's great. Congratulations. Thanks. He smiled, but then his expression shifted, something softer creeping in. You seem stressed. Are you okay? I forced a smile. Just tired, long week. He nodded like that made sense and pushed off the counter. Well, hang in there. It'll be over in a few hours. He left and I stood there staring at the empty doorway. Partner track. He thought he was winning. He thought he'd sabotaged me, delayed my funding, weakened my company. He thought I was still the invisible wife, the one who brought pie and folded napkins and disappeared into the background. He had no idea. When the kitchen was finally empty, I pulled my phone out of my purse and checked my messages. There was one from Riley sent 20 minutes ago. Good luck. Remember your worth existed before they saw it. I read it twice, then set the phone down. In my purse, tucked into a leather folder, were 3 documents. The first was Marcus Reyes's private investigator report, 80 pages detailing Tristan's sabotage, the burner phone, the target receipt, the voice analysis, the recordings. The second was a draft copy of the TechCrunch article sent to me by the editor 2 days ago. Pathway, the edtech startup revolutionizing literacy support. My name at the top. The $45 million Series B funding, the $180 million valuation, the 50,000 students served. The third was a set of LLC documents. Sinclair Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware, sole owner Harper Sinclair. Property acquisition 4225 Laurel Canyon Drive, Austin, Texas. The Thornton family home. I'd bought it 3 weeks ago during Robert's liquidation phase. Cash offer 10-day close-no inspection. The family didn't know yet. They'd been renting it back from the LLC under a short-term lease that expired in January. But they'd find out soon enough. I slipped the folder back into my purse and zipped it shut. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I thought about the last 8 years. The dismissals, the condescension, the guest house I was denied, the coffee-stained business plan Tristan had read in secret, the sabotage, the fake phone calls, the way they'd made me feel small, invisible, insignificant. And I thought about what was coming. In about 2 hours, Robert would check his phone. TechCrunch would publish their list at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Texas time. He'd see Pathway at number 12. He'd see my name. He'd see the valuation. And everything would change. But first, I'd have to sit through their toasts. I'd have to smile while Robert praised Tristan's partner track. I'd have to listen to Diane's veiled remarks about my humble background. I'd have to pretend one last time that I was invisible. One last time. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, smoothed the front of my sweater, and walked toward the dining room. The calm before the storm. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. China plates edged in gold. Crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. White linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. 23 people seated around the table. Family, friends, business associates. People whose names I'd learned and forgotten over 8 years of Thanksgivings. And me at the far end. Tristan sat in the center, flanked by his parents. Robert at the head of the table, Diane to his right, Tristan to his left. Jessica sat directly across from Tristan, her phone face down on the table despite Diane's usual no phones rule. I'd been placed at the opposite end next to an elderly man I didn't recognize, and a woman who'd introduced herself as someone's wife and then immediately turned away. The seating wasn't an accident. It never was. Diane tapped her glass with a fork and the room quieted. Before we begin, she said, her voice clear and commanding, Robert has something he'd like to share. Robert stood adjusting his tie, his expression warm and proud. He picked up his wine glass and looked at Tristan. Tristan, he began, you're 36 years old and you've already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime. This morning I got a call from the senior partners at Morrison and Blake. They've decided to put you on partner track. A murmur of approval rippled through the table. You saved our clients millions in the Brennan case, Robert continued. You showed them what it means to be a Thornton strategic, relentless brilliant. You're exactly what this family needs. Someone to carry on our legacy. He raised his glass higher. To Tristan. To Tristan, the room echoed. I lifted my glass to my lips and drank, but I didn't raise it. No one noticed. As the appetizers were passed around the man next to me, someone's business partner, I thought, turned to me with polite curiosity. And what do you do? He asked. I'm a guidance counselor, I said, at a public middle school here in Austin. Oh, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. That's nice. He turned back to his plate. The conversation moved on. Across the table, Jessica was holding court. "I just hit 50,000 followers last week," she said, her voice bright and animated. She was talking to a woman in a designer dress someone Diane had introduced as a philanthropist. "And a beauty brand reached out. They're offering me $5,000 for 3 sponsored posts." "That's wonderful, Jessica," Diane said, beaming. "You're building your own brand. That's real entrepreneurial spirit." Jessica glanced at me and I could see the familiar glint in her eyes, the one that said, "Watch this." "Harper's been working on something too, haven't you?" she said sweetly. "What do you call it again?" "Your little education project." I set my fork down. "Pathway." "Right, Pathway." She turned to the table. "Harper's been working on it for 5 years now, at the library mostly. It's very dedicated." Diane nodded in agreement. "Harper's always been more focused on meaning than money. It's very noble." Noble was the word people used when they meant naive. I took a sip of water and said nothing. Tristan set down his wineglass and turned to me, his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Harper, are you still spending your nights at the public library working on that, what do you call it, your education project?" I met his eyes. "Yes." He leaned back, shaking his head with a patronizing smile. "Honey, I've been patient. But at some point you have to face reality. No one is going to invest real money in a guidance counselor's side hobby. That's just not how the world works." He picked up his glass again, swirling the wine. "I mean, it's cute that you're passionate about it, really. But passion doesn't pay bills. Jessica makes $5,000 per Instagram post. That's a real business. What you're doing is—" He paused, searching for the word. "Recreational." A few people around the table shifted uncomfortably. Robert cleared his throat. "Tristan—" "No, Dad, I'm just being honest." Tristan looked at me, his expression almost pitying. "Harper works until 11 p.m. some nights on this thing, at a public library, for free, for 5 years. And what does she have to show for it? A website, some students who use it." He turned to the table as if inviting them to agree. "At some point, you have to ask yourself, is this a business, or is this just a very time-consuming hobby?" The room went quiet. I set my napkin on the table, my hands perfectly steady. "You're right," I said softly. Tristan blinked, surprised. "I am—" "Yes," I said. "At some point, you do have to ask yourself that question." I smiled. He didn't understand yet, but he would, in about 3 minutes. The turkey was carved. The sides were passed. Conversation ebbed and flowed awkward now, people avoiding eye contact with me, unsure of what to say after Tristan's speech. I sat at the end of the table, silent, waiting, and then Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and Diane shot him a look. "No phones at the table, Robert." "Just a second," he said, not looking up. TechCrunch just published their annual EdTech list. It always comes out on Thanksgiving. I need to know what's happening in the tech space. Some of our clients are in that sector. Jessica perked up. "Oh, Dad read it out loud. I love those lists." Robert scrolled his reading glasses perched on his nose. "All right, let's see. 50 most promising EdTech startups. Number 1 is some AI tutoring platform out of Boston. Number 5 is a coding boot camp in San Francisco." He scrolled further. Number 12. He paused. Pathway, an Austin-based guidance platform that helps students with career planning and literacy support. I felt my heart begin to pound. Robert kept reading, but his voice had gone quieter now, more to himself than to the table. Founded in 2020, recently closed a Series B funding round. Valued at— His face changed. The color drained from his cheeks. His jaw tightened. He looked up from the phone, his eyes scanning the table until they landed on me. The room had gone still. "It says—" Robert's voice was tight, controlled. "It says the founder and CEO is Harper Sinclair." Silence. Complete suffocating silence. Everyone turned to look at me. Diane's fork hovered in midair. Tristan's expression was frozen, unreadable. Jessica's mouth had fallen open slightly, her eyes wide, and Robert just stared. I could feel the weight of their gazes, 23 people all focused on me, the woman who'd been invisible for 8 years. This was it, the moment I'd been planning for, The moment I'd built toward step by step, decision by decision, late night by late night. The moment I'd been waiting for. And the moment I'd been dreading. I set my glass down carefully, my hands steady, and met Robert's eyes. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because I'd learned over 8 years in this family that silence could be louder than words. And right now, they needed to sit with what they'd just heard. Harper Sinclair, founder, CEO, Pathway. The room stayed silent, and I stayed silent with it. I glanced at Tristan. His face had gone from confident to confused to pale in the span of seconds. He was replaying it in his mind, I could tell. No one is going to invest real money. What you're doing is recreational, a very time-consuming hobby. Every word he'd just said 3 minutes ago in front of everyone. And now, I let the silence stretch. Let them sit with it. Let Tristan realize what he'd just done. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't invisible anymore. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Robert was the first to break it. Is there... He paused, clearing his throat. Is there another Harper Sinclair? That's quite the coincidence. I could see it in his eyes, the desperate search for a rational explanation. A way to make this make sense. Diane let out a short, forced laugh. Harper is a counselor. She doesn't run a company. She said it like the two things were mutually exclusive, like I couldn't possibly be both. I set my napkin on the table, my hands steady. It's not a coincidence, I said quietly. The room went still again. Robert's eyes narrowed. What? It's me, I said louder this time. I'm the founder of Pathway. Diane's smile faltered. Harper, this isn't funny. I'm not joking. Tristan let out a nervous laugh, the kind that sounded like he was trying to convince himself this was absurd. Honey, you work at Travis Middle School. You couldn't possibly... I turned to Robert, ignoring Tristan entirely. Read the rest, I said. Robert hesitated, then looked back down at his phone. His reading glasses had slipped down his nose, and he pushed them up with one finger. He scrolled, his jaw tightening with every line. And then he read aloud. Pathway, founded by former guidance counselor Harper Sinclair, reached a valuation of $180 million in just 5 years. Gasps rippled through the table. He kept reading. The platform connects over 50,000 struggling students annually with mentors, tutors, and career opportunities. Last month, Pathway closed a $45 million Series B funding round led by Sequoia Capital, one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious venture firms. His voice faltered slightly, but he continued. In an interview, Sinclair credited her immigrant parents, a truck driver and a house cleaner, for inspiring her mission to ensure that no student is left behind due to lack of resources. He stopped. The dining room was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Robert slowly set his phone down on the table. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. You built a company, he said, his voice flat. Worth $180 million. Yes, I said. Jessica's voice came out high and disbelieving. $45 million? You raised $45 million. Yes. Diane's hands were gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. This can't be real. Harper, if this were true, you would have told us. You're part of this family. You would have... Should I have... I asked, my voice calm but sharp. She blinked. What should I have told you? I repeated, given everything. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Robert, then back at me. We're your family, she said, her voice rising slightly. Of course you should have told us. I met her eyes. Are we? I asked quietly. The words hung in the air. Diane's face flushed. How dare you? But before she could finish, one of the guests, a woman in a navy dress whom I vaguely recognized as someone's wife, pulled out her phone and started scrolling. It's real, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. There's a Forbes article from last month. The Quiet Founder, How Harper Sinclair Built an EdTech Empire in Silence. There's a photo of her and everything. She turned the phone toward the people sitting near her, and I watched as heads leaned in, eyes widening. The whispers started. 180 million. Sequoia Capital backed her. She did this while working as a school counselor. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from shock to something harder to read. When did you start this? He asked. 5 years ago, I said. 2020. I was working at the school and I kept seeing the same pattern students with potential but no resources, no one to guide them, no one to believe in them, so I built Pathway. 5 years, Robert repeated as if testing the words. You've been building this for 5 years, While I was here, I finished. At your dinners, at your holiday parties, sitting at the end of your table, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. Diane's face had gone from pale to flushed. How could you not tell us? We could have helped you, supported you. We have connections, resources. Could you have, I asked. She stared at me. Because 3 years ago, I continued my voice steady. I asked to use the guest house, just a few hours a week, to meet with developers to have a quiet space to work, and you said no. Diane's mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked at Robert. You told me the guest house was reserved for family and distinguished guests, that it wasn't appropriate to use it as a co-working space. Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. 2 weeks later, I said, turning to Jessica, you were using it as your Instagram studio. Jessica's face went red. That's different. Is it? I asked. The table had gone completely silent now. Even the guests had stopped whispering. Tristan's chair scraped loudly against the floor. I looked at him. He was standing, his hands braced on the table, his face a strange mix of pale and flushed. His jaw was clenched, his breathing uneven. Harper, he said, his voice tight. Can we talk in private? I didn't move. No, I said simply. His eyes widened. What? If you have something to say, I said, my voice calm, you can say it here. His face went from pale to deep red. I could see it, the panic, the anger, the realization that he was cornered. He knew I knew. And I knew he was about to try to spin this, to make himself the victim, to paint me as the one who'd been dishonest, who'd kept secrets, who'd betrayed the family. But the question was, would I let him speak first? Or would I tell them what he'd done? I looked at him, at his clenched fists and his red face and the desperation in his eyes, and I made my decision. Before you say anything, Tristan, I said, my voice quiet but clear, there's something everyone should know. His face went white. What are you doing? He whispered. I met his eyes. The truth, I said. Tristan's voice shifted, calm, measured, controlled, the voice he used in depositions. Harper, he said, his tone almost soothing. Can we discuss this privately? I didn't move. No, I said simply. His jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He turned to the table, addressing everyone with the same practiced calm. I apologize for this disruption, he said. My wife seems to be agitated. I think we should... I'm not agitated, I said, cutting him off. I'm telling the truth. He looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw panic flash across his face. But then he smoothed it over, replacing it with something softer, something that looked like hurt. Harper, he said, his voice dropping, I'm proud of what you built, I am, but I'm hurt that you hid this from me, from all of us, for 5 years. He gestured to the table. We should have been partners in this. We're married. We're supposed to share our lives. I met his eyes. Should we have? I asked. He blinked. What? Should we have been partners? I repeated. He turned to Robert as if seeking backup. Dad, I'm shocked. I had no idea. I thought Harper was grading papers late at school, helping students one-on-one. I would have supported her if she'd told me. I would have helped. Are you sure? I asked. He turned back to me, his expression earnest. Of course. When you talked about helping students, I always said it was admirable. You said it was cute, I corrected. He hesitated. Last year, I continued my voice steady. When I mentioned developing learning resources for at-risk students, you said don't let it distract from your real work. I don't remember saying that. I do, I said, very clearly. The table was silent now, all eyes on us. Robert's voice cut through the tension. When did you start Pathway? I turned to him. 2020, 5 years ago. And where did you get the capital? He asked, his tone sharp. Starting a company requires funding. My salary, I said. My savings. I bootstrapped for the first 2 years, then secured angel funding. Tristan didn't contribute a single cent. Pathway is my sole property. Tristan's face flushed. Because you never asked? I looked at him. I had a business plan, I said. 80 pages, very detailed. Financial projections, market analysis, growth strategy, everything. He froze. I tilted my head. You never saw it. There was a beat of silence. I never saw it, he said carefully. I stared at him. 10 months ago, I said, my voice calm, our apartment had a pipe burst. Middle of the night, water everywhere. Do you remember? His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I remember. You helped me rescue my papers. I continued. Grabbed everything off my desk, carried it into the living room to dry. You told me to go to bed that you'd take care of it. You said you'd make sure everything dried properly. He nodded slowly. I did. Very thoughtful, I said. He said nothing. But you also read them, I said. All 80 pages, while drinking coffee. His face went pale. That's ridiculous. Page 15 has a coffee ring. I said, my voice even. Starbucks, Pike Place, dark roast, your order. I don't drink coffee. That stain wasn't there before the pipe burst. The silence was deafening. I leaned forward slightly. You sat in our living room at 2 a.m, drinking coffee, reading every single page of my business plan. You saw the projections. You saw the partnerships. You saw everything. Tristan opened his mouth, then closed it. He swallowed. I saw it. Yes, but I didn't think it was serious. It looked like a draft, a passion project. A passion project, I repeated. Yes, an 80-page investment proposal. I said slowly, with financial models projecting $200 million in revenue over 5 years. That wasn't serious. He didn't answer. Robert's voice was low-controlled. So you knew. It wasn't a question. Tristan's shoulders sagged slightly. He nodded. I knew. Diane looked between us, her face a mixture of confusion and anger. You knew your wife was building a company, and you didn't tell us. I didn't think. Tristan started, but I cut him off. You didn't think it would succeed, I said. He looked at me, and I could see it in his eyes, the truth he didn't want to admit. You read that plan, I continued, and you thought it was impossible. You thought I was dreaming. You thought there was no way a guidance counselor from a public school could build something worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Harper, so you said nothing, I said. You went back to bed, and the next morning when I asked if you dried the papers, you said yes, and that was it. You never mentioned what you'd read. He was silent. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Knowing was just the beginning, I said quietly. Robert frowned. What do you mean? I kept my eyes on Tristan. Tell them, I said. Tell them what you did after you read my plan. Tristan's face went white. Harper, I don't know what you're. Tell them, I repeated, my voice calm but cold. Or I will. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tristan looked around the table at his father, his mother, his sister, the guests who were watching with wide eyes and barely concealed fascination. He looked back at me. I don't know what you want me to say, he said, his voice tight. I reached into my purse and pulled out a leather folder. Then let me help you, I said. I opened the folder and set a document on the table in front of him. It was the first page of Marcus Reyes's private investigator report. Tristan stared at it. His breathing quickened. What is that? Diane asked. I didn't take my eyes off Tristan. Tell them what you did, I said again. And this time he didn't answer, because he knew. He knew exactly what I was about to reveal. I set the private investigator's report back in my purse and turned my attention to Diane. Before we talk about what Tristan did, I said, my voice calm, let's talk about what you did. 3 years ago. Diane blinked. What? Spring of 2022, I said. I came to you and Robert with a request. I asked if I could use the guest house a few hours a week to work on Pathway. I offered to pay for utilities, electricity, water, internet, whatever it cost. Diane's face shifted, uncomfortable. Harper, we had no idea you were building something this significant. You never asked, I said simply. She opened her mouth, then closed it. You told me, I continued, that the space was reserved for distinguished guests. Do you remember saying that? Diane glanced at Robert, then back at me. Well, yes, but we occasionally have business partners who stay there. Do you? I asked. When was the last time you had a business partner stay in the guest house? Silence. I waited. No one answered. 2 weeks, I said quietly. 2 weeks after you refused me, Jessica moved in. Jessica's face went red. Ring lights. I continued, my tone even. A backdrop, a makeup station, a tripod. She turned the guest house into a studio to film Instagram videos. That was different, Jessica started. Different how? I asked, turning to her. Explain to me how teaching makeup tutorials is more valuable than a platform that helps 50,000 students every year. Jessica stared at me, her mouth open, but no words came out. I looked back at Robert. You said you thought I was just experimenting. But that's not what you thought, is it? He didn't answer. You thought I wasn't important enough, I said. You thought what I was doing didn't matter, so you gave the space to Jessica instead. Diane's voice was tight. Harper, that's not fair. Isn't it? I asked. You had an 800-square-foot guest house sitting empty. I asked for a few hours a week, and you said no, because you didn't think I deserved it. We didn't know. You didn't ask, I said again, louder this time. You didn't care to know. You assumed. You assumed I was wasting my time. You assumed my work wasn't real. I took a breath, steadying myself. So instead of your guest house, I said I worked at the public library until 11 at night, almost every single night for 3 years. Riley, my co-founder and CTO, would meet me there. We'd sit in those hard plastic chairs hunched over laptops with dying batteries coding until the staff told us to leave. Diane's face had gone pale. You built this in a library? Yes, I said. Because you'd rather give your daughter a studio to film makeup videos than give me a quiet space to build something that would help thousands of kids. The table was silent. Jessica looked down at her plate, her hands clenched in her lap. Robert was staring at me, his expression unreadable. And Diane looked like she'd been slapped. Riley owns 25% of Pathway now, I added. She's been with me since the beginning. She believed in what I was building when no one else did. And she's going to make millions because of it. I let that sit for a moment. If you'd said yes, I continued, if you'd let me use that guest house, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I would have told you what I was working on. Maybe we would have been closer. But you didn't. You chose Jessica. You always chose Jessica. Jessica's head snapped up. That's not, isn't it? I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. When was the last time your parents said no to you? She didn't answer. When was the last time they questioned your choices, told you your work wasn't important, made you feel like you didn't matter? Silence. I turned back to Diane. You told me the guest house was for family and distinguished guests. But I was family. I'd been married to your son for 5 years, and you still didn't think I was worth it. Diane's voice was barely a whisper. Harper, I didn't mean... Yes, you did, I said. You meant exactly what you said. I wasn't distinguished enough. I wasn't impressive enough. I was just the school counselor who married your son. And Jessica... I glanced at her. Jessica was your daughter. She mattered. I didn't. Robert cleared his throat. Harper, we made a mistake. You should have treated me like I was part of this family, I said, cutting him off. But you didn't. And now you're sitting here learning that I built a company worth $180 million while you thought I was grading papers. I looked around the table at the guests who were watching with wide eyes at Diane's pale face, at Robert's tight jaw, at Jessica's clenched hands. You want to know why I didn't tell you? I asked. This is why, because you never once made me feel like I mattered. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. And then I turned to Jessica. And speaking of Jessica's ventures, I said, my tone shifting. Jessica froze. Her eyes went wide, her face draining of color. Harper, she started, but I held up a hand. No, I said. We're not done yet. She stared at me and I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew. She knew what I was about to say. And I realized in that moment that they'd all thought this was just about Tristan, about the guest house, about me being hurt and wanting to air grievances. They had no idea. They had no idea how deep the rot went, how much I'd uncovered, how many secrets I was about to drag into the light. I glanced at Robert, whose phone was still face down on the table, at Diane, who looked like she was holding her breath, at Tristan, who'd been silent since I'd pulled out the private investigator's report, and I smiled. Let's talk about the lawsuits, I said quietly. Jessica's face went white. I turned my full attention to Jessica. How many clients are currently suing you? I asked. Her face went from red to white in an instant. Harper, that's not 4, I said, cutting her off. 4 clients for real estate fraud. Robert's head snapped toward Jessica. What? I kept my eyes on her. Misrepresenting property conditions, concealing foundation cracks and mold, pressuring an elderly couple to sign a contract without giving them time for legal review, and my personal favorite, pocketing inspection fees without actually hiring an inspector. Jessica's hands were shaking. Those clients are lying. It's all exaggerated. They're trying to... The Texas Real Estate Commission is investigating, I said, my voice calm. 4 separate complaints. You could lose your license. The table had gone completely silent. Robert stared at Jessica, his face pale. Jessica, is this true? She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. Daddy, it's complicated. The clients are... Is it true? He repeated, his voice harder now. She started crying. It's not as bad as it sounds. The lawyers said we can settle, it's expensive. How expensive? Diane asked, her voice tight. Jessica didn't answer. I did. Over $200,000, I said, in legal fees, in the past 6 months alone. Diane's head whipped toward Robert. $200,000, Robert. You never told me. Robert's jaw was clenched. He didn't look at Diane. He kept his eyes on the table. I was trying to protect her, he said quietly. Protect the family. Protect the company's reputation. If word got out that our daughter was under investigation for fraud... So you paid, I said. He nodded slowly. I paid. I leaned forward slightly. You paid $200,000 to defend her against lawsuits for defrauding clients, while refusing to give me a free room to build a company that would help 50,000 students. The silence was suffocating. Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. $200,000. And it's not over, I added. The TREC investigation is ongoing. If they find her guilty, she'll lose her license. The lawsuits will continue, and there's the possibility of criminal charges. Jessica's sobbing grew louder. Harper, please, what? I asked. Please stop telling the truth. Please pretend you didn't pressure an 82-year-old woman into signing a contract without her lawyer present. Please ignore the fact that you pocketed $1,500 in inspection fees and never hired an inspector. I made mistakes, Jessica cried. I was under pressure. The market was competitive and I needed to close deals. So you committed fraud, I said simply. Harper. Robert started, but I held up a hand. No, I said. You don't get to defend her. Not now. Because while you were writing check after check to bail Jessica out of her own mess, you were telling me that the guest house was too important to use for my passion project. Robert's face was ashen. I turned back to Jessica. Do you know how much Pathway is worth? She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. $180 million, I said. Your Instagram studio, the one your parents gave you instead of giving me workspace. It helped you build a following that pays you $5,000 for 3 posts. My company, the one I built in public libraries because your family wouldn't give me a room, is worth $180 million. Jessica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I looked at Robert. And those legal fees you've been paying, they're destroying your business. His eyes met mine, and I saw the truth there. Investors are getting nervous, I continued. Word is spreading about Jessica's lawsuits, about the TREC investigation. They're wondering what else the Thornton family is hiding, and they're pulling back. Robert didn't deny it. That's why you're liquidating assets, I said. Isn't it? He swallowed hard. We're restructuring. You're selling everything you can, I corrected. Because Jessica's legal fees and the damage to your reputation are bleeding you dry. Diane looked at Robert, her expression somewhere between fury and heartbreak. Is that true? He didn't answer. Robert, she said, her voice trembling. Is that true? We're managing it, he said, but his voice was weak. I sat back in my chair. The guest house wasn't just about space, I said quietly. It was about who you valued, who you believed in, who you thought was worth investing in. I looked around the table at Diane, whose hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, at Robert, whose face was the color of ash, at Jessica, who was sobbing into her napkin. You chose Jessica, I said, over and over again. You gave her the guest house. You paid her legal fees. You protected her reputation while she defrauded clients and destroyed yours. She's our daughter, Diane started. And I was your son's wife, I said. For 8 years, and you never once treated me like I mattered. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway again. I turned back to Robert. Jessica's legal crisis, I said. It's going to cost you a lot more than $200,000. The lawsuits are ongoing. The TREC investigation could take years. And if they find her guilty, the fallout will destroy what's left of your business. Robert looked at me, his expression unreadable. You made your choice, I said. You chose to protect Jessica, to fund her mistakes, to cover up her fraud, and now you're paying the price. I paused. But at least, I added, my voice soft, she got the guest house. Jessica let out a choked sob. Diane looked like she'd been struck. And Robert just stared at me, his face confirming everything I'd said. The Thornton empire was crumbling. The Golden Child had cost them more than money. She'd cost them their reputation, their business, their credibility. And they'd chosen her anyway. I glanced at Tristan, who'd been silent since I'd pulled out the private investigator's report. He was watching me, his face pale, his jaw clenched. And I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I still had the PI report. I still had proof of what he'd done. And I wasn't done yet. Before I reveal what Tristan did with that burner phone and how he tried to destroy 50,000 students' futures, comment the number 180 below. That's Pathway's valuation in millions, and I need to know you're still here for the truth. And just so you know, the story ahead contains some dramatized elements for educational purposes. If you'd rather stop here, feel free, but what's coming next is the most shocking part yet. I turned my attention back to Tristan. Now, I said, my voice calm, about what you did after you read my business plan. He was still standing, his hands braced on the table. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. I told you, he said, his voice tight. I put it back. I dried it. I didn't. In February, I said, cutting him off, you bought a burner phone. His face went even paler. At Target, I continued, the one in Muller, February 3rd, 7:42 p.m. The room went silent. You used your red card, I added, to get the rewards points. A ripple of murmurs went through the table. Tristan stared at me. Harper. Between July and September, I said, my tone even, you called 8 schools, current and prospective Pathway clients. You posed as a concerned parent from another district. That's insane, he said, his voice rising. You spread false rumors. I continued, ignoring him. You said Pathway had security issues, privacy concerns. You made up problems that didn't exist. Robert stood his chair, scraping against the floor. Tristan, did you do this? Tristan looked at his father, then at me, then back at his father. There was a long silence. He swallowed. Yes. Gasps rippled through the table. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Tristan, what? Robert demanded, his voice hard. Tristan turned to me, his face flushed now, anger replacing the fear. Because she lied. For 5 years, she was building this company behind my back, and I had no idea. With my time, I said, my voice steady. My money, my work, nothing of yours. You're my wife, he shouted. You owed me honesty. And you owed me loyalty, or I said quietly. He stared at me, his breathing heavy. I have the receipts, I said, pulling the PI report from my purse and setting it on the table. The Target purchase is linked to your red card. The phone number is traced to the burner. I hired a private investigator. He found everything. Tristan's jaw clenched. I flipped the report open, pointing to a highlighted section. The investigator said something interesting. He said people like you, successful, confident, used to being the smartest person in the room, often underestimate their targets. I looked up at Tristan. You wanted that 2% cash back. You didn't think I was smart enough to trace a receipt. Tristan's face went red. You thought, I continued, that I'd never find out. That I was too naive, too trusting, too stupid to figure it out. That's not. But I did, I said. And now everyone knows. The table was silent, all eyes on Tristan. I was trying to protect our marriage. He said, his voice desperate now. You were hiding this massive thing from me. I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know if you were planning to leave or... So you tried to destroy my company, I said. I was scared, he shouted. You were building this whole life without me. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to trust me, I said. How could I trust you when you were lying to me? I wasn't lying, I said. I was protecting myself. From this, from you. He stared at me, his chest heaving. You read my business plan, I said. You saw what I was building. You saw the projections, the partnerships, the revenue forecasts. And instead of being proud, instead of supporting me, you decided to sabotage me. I didn't sabotage. You called 8 schools, I said, my voice sharp. You pretended to be a parent. You spread lies. You scared them into canceling contracts. You cost me months of work. You cost Pathway thousands of dollars. You hurt the students we were trying to help. Tristan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Dallas ISD, I said. Westlake Academy, Round Rock Middle School, Travis High. You called all of them. You told them Pathway was sharing student data with advertisers. You said we weren't FERPA compliant. You made up stories about security breaches that never happened. Robert was staring at Tristan, his face a mixture of shock and disgust. And it worked, I said. For a while. 3 schools paused their contracts. 2 canceled outright. We lost $50,000 in revenue. I let that sit for a moment. But you know what? I said. It didn't stop me. I hired a PI. I traced the calls. I found the burner phone. I connected it to your red card. And then I closed the Series B anyway. $45 million, despite everything you did to try to stop me. Tristan's shoulders sagged. You underestimated me, I said quietly. Just like your family did. You thought I was just a school counselor. You thought I couldn't build something real. You thought I'd give up. I stood placing my hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. But I didn't, I said. I kept going. And now Pathway is worth $180 million. And you... I looked at him. You're the man who tried to destroy his wife's company because you were too insecure to let her succeed. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Tristan looked around the table at his father's hard expression, at his mother's tear-streaked face, at Jessica, who was still crying into her napkin, at the guests who were watching with wide, horrified eyes. And then he looked at me. I'm sorry, he whispered. I stared at him. Are you? I asked. He didn't answer. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence do the work, letting them all see what Tristan had become, what he'd done. The man who'd tried to destroy his own wife's company because he couldn't handle her success. And then I picked up the PI report and flipped to another page. The phone calls, I said quietly, weren't the worst of it. His face went white again. There was more, I said. Wasn't there Tristan? He didn't move. What you did with those phone calls, I continued, was bad. You sabotaged my company, you hurt my clients, you scared schools into pulling contracts. I paused. But what you planned, I said, my voice dropping, what you were going to do next, I let the silence stretch. That was worse, I said, much worse. Tristan's breathing was shallow now, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Tell them, I said, or I will. He stared at me, and I saw it in his eyes. Panic, desperation, the realization that I knew everything. And I did. Because the P, I hadn't just found the burner phone. He'd found the emails, the draft divorce filing, the plan to claim half of Pathway's valuation, the strategy to destroy me financially, legally, and emotionally. And I was about to drag it all into the light. I glanced around the table one more time. At Robert, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. At Diane, whose perfect composure had finally shattered. At Jessica, who'd stopped crying and was now staring at her brother with something close to horror. And at the guests, the Morrison and Blake partners, the business associates, the family friends, all of them frozen, unable to look away. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. This was a reckoning, and I wasn't done yet. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The schools, I said, keep recordings of all parent feedback. It's standard protocol for quality assurance, legal protection. I held up my phone so everyone could see. One of the principals sent me these, I said, after the private investigator contacted her. I tapped the screen and turned on the speakerphone. The room went silent, and then Tristan's voice filled the dining room. It was slightly muffled, slightly higher pitched than usual, like he was trying to disguise it, but it was unmistakably him. "Hello, I'm calling as a concerned parent from Richardson ISD. I've heard some troubling things about Pathway's data handling process, privacy concerns, issues at other districts. I just wanted to make sure the board was aware before moving forward with the contract." I let it play for a few more seconds, then paused it. "That was August 7th, I said, Dallas Westlake Academy." I played another clip. "I just think the board should know before deploying this software to our children. There have been reports of data breaches, student information being shared without consent. I'm not saying it's definite, but I think it warrants a closer look." I stopped the recording and set my phone on the table. "That's my husband," I said, my voice calm, "pretending to be a parent, lying about my company." Tristan's face was ashen. "That doesn't sound like voice analysis." I said cutting him off confirms a 94% match. He stared at me. The private investigator had the recordings analyzed by a forensic audio specialist. I continued, "The same kind used in criminal cases, 94%. That's higher than most courtroom standards." Tristan's mouth opened, but no words came out. "5 schools canceled contracts," I said. "Not 3, 5, because your lies spread. Because once one school pulls out, others get nervous. They start asking questions. They start Googling. And even though there was nothing to find, no data breaches, no privacy violations, nothing, the rumor was enough." I paused, letting that sink in. "Over $400,000 in lost revenue," I said. "Contracts we'd spent months negotiating. Relationships we'd spent years building. Gone. Because you made 8 phone calls." Robert was staring at Tristan, his face a mixture of shock and disgust. "And the Series B round I added. The one I closed in September, it was supposed to close in March, 6 months earlier. But investors got nervous when they saw we were losing clients. They wanted to know why. They wanted reassurance. And that delayed everything." I looked at Tristan. 6 months. Do you know how much a 6-month delay costs a startup? How much momentum we lost? How many students we couldn't help because we were stuck in due diligence hell? He didn't answer. "If you just told me from the start," he started, his voice desperate. I laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "If I'd told you from the start," I said, "you would have done what supported me, believed in me." I leaned forward slightly. "You spent 8 years making me feel small. Every idea I shared with you, every dream I mentioned, you called it cute. Now you patted me on the head and told me to focus on my real work. You married me because you thought I'd always be beneath you." Tristan's face went red. "You didn't want a partner," I said. "You wanted someone who'd make you feel superior, someone who'd never threaten your ego. And when you found out I'd built something bigger than anything you'd ever done, you couldn't handle it." He was silent now, his jaw clenched. Robert's voice was low, controlled. "Tristan, do you understand that you could be reported to the Texas State Bar for this?" Tristan's head snapped toward his father. "What?" "Fraud," Robert said. "Misrepresentation, defamation, tortious interference with business contracts." He ticked them off on his fingers. "You're a lawyer. You know these things. You could be disbarred." Tristan's face went white. "Your partner, Track," Robert continued, "gone. Your career destroyed. And you did it to yourself." The table was silent. I looked at Jessica, who was staring at Tristan with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You really did this," she whispered. "You actually—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Even for you, Tristan, that's—" She didn't finish the sentence. Diane was crying now, her hands covering her face. "How did our Thanksgiving turn into this?" she said, her voice muffled. "How did we—" But she didn't finish either, because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. I picked up my phone and put it back in my purse. I'd made my point. The recordings were damning. The voice analysis was irrefutable. The damage was quantified. And Tristan had no defense. "You know what the worst part is?" I said quietly. He looked at me. "The students," I said, "the 50,000 students Pathway serves every year, the ones who are struggling, the ones who don't have parents who can afford tutors or test prep or college counselors, the ones we were trying to help." I let that sit for a moment. When you sabotaged Pathway, I said, you didn't just hurt me. You didn't just hurt my business. You hurt them. You delayed funding that could have expanded our services. You scared away schools that could have given their students access to resources they desperately needed. Tristan's shoulders sagged. And you did it, I said, because you were jealous. Because you couldn't stand the idea that I'd succeeded without you. I stood placing my hands on the table, looking down at him. You're a lawyer, I said. You're supposed to uphold the law, protect people. And instead, you committed fraud. You sabotaged a company that helps kids. You hurt the most vulnerable people in our community. I paused. All because your ego couldn't handle the fact that your wife was smarter and more successful than you. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway again. And then I said very quietly, but sabotaging my clients wasn't your only plan, was it, Tristan? His face drained of every last bit of color. I saw it in his eyes, the panic, the realization that I knew more than he'd thought. And I knew I had him. The question was, how much more could this family take? How many more secrets could I drag into the light before they broke completely? I glanced around the table at Robert's hard expression, at Diane's tear-streaked face, at Jessica's wide eyes, at the guests who were sitting frozen, afraid to move. And I realized I didn't care. They'd made their choices. They'd chosen Jessica. They'd chosen Tristan. They'd chosen to dismiss me, to belittle me, to treat me like I didn't matter. And now they were going to live with the consequences. I picked up the PI report again and flipped to the next section. Let's talk about the rest of your plan, I said. My voice was steady, calm, surgical. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was simply revealing the truth, piece by piece, layer by layer. And there was one more layer left. The worst one. The one that would destroy whatever was left of Tristan's reputation in this room. I looked at him, and for a brief moment I saw the man I'd married. The man who'd told me I was the most grounded person he'd ever met. The man who'd held my hand at our courthouse wedding and promised to build a life with me. But that man was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed at all. Go ahead, Tristan said hoarsely. Tell them everything. His voice was defeated, hollow, like he'd finally accepted that there was no way out. And I realized he was right. There wasn't. I flipped to the next section of the PI report and pulled out a stack of printed pages. After you discovered Pathway in January, I said, looking at Tristan, you started researching. I held up the first page. Your Google search history, I said, from February. I read aloud. Can a husband claim ownership of his wife's company? Texas community property law startup. How to lower a company's valuation before divorce. The room went completely still. Tristan's face went white. Where did you get those? I have legal access to our shared devices, I said calmly. The laptop in the living room, the one we both use, everything on it is admissible in court. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words. I set the page down and picked up another. And then, I said, in March, you drafted an email to a divorce lawyer. I held it up so everyone could see. Dear Mr. Patterson, I read, I'm writing to inquire about my options regarding a potential divorce. My wife recently started a technology company called Pathway. If the business was built during our marriage, I understand that under Texas community property law, I may be entitled to claim 50% of its value. My question is, what is the best strategy for ensuring I receive my fair share? I paused, letting that sink in. Then I continued. Specifically, if the company's valuation is currently high, would it be beneficial to lower that valuation before filing? I've heard of cases where spouses have successfully argued that a business was overvalued at the time of divorce proceedings. I looked up at the table. No one was breathing. And here, I said, flipping to the next page, is the lawyer's response. I read it aloud. Mr. Thornton, thank you for your inquiry. In cases involving high-value businesses, it is not uncommon for one spouse to attempt to lower the company's valuation prior to filing for divorce. This can be done through a variety of means, reducing revenue-canceling contracts, creating operational difficulties. However, I must caution you that such actions could be considered financial fraud if proven in court. I set the pages down on the table. You didn't just sabotage me to hurt me, I said quietly. You sabotaged me to lower Pathway's value, and then you were going to divorce me and claim half of what was left. The silence was deafening. Diane's voice was barely a whisper. Tristan, you were planning to divorce her. He didn't answer. That email, he finally said, his voice hoarse, was just, I was exploring my options. I wasn't serious. Your lawyer wrote, I said, my voice sharp now, lower your wife's company valuation before filing. That's not exploring options, Tristan. That's calculated destruction. Robert stood his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. This is corporate espionage, he said, his voice hard, against your own wife. I was scared. Tristan shouted, his voice cracking. You were building this thing, and I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if you were going to leave me or... So you decided to destroy it, I said, and steal it. I wasn't trying to steal. Yes, you were, I said. You consulted a lawyer about how to claim 50% of my company. You researched how to lower its valuation so you could take half of a smaller number. You called 8 schools and lied about Pathway so investors would get scared and pull back. You sabotaged my funding round. You cost me $400,000 in revenue. All so you could divorce me and walk away with half of whatever was left. Tristan's face was red now, tears streaming down his cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. You were going to be so much more successful than me. You were going to be richer than me. And His voice broke. I couldn't handle it. So you tried to steal it, I said, before I could. He didn't deny it. I looked around the table at Robert, whose expression was a mixture of disgust and disbelief, at Diane, who was crying openly now, at Jessica, who looked like she wanted to disappear, at the guests, who were frozen in their seats, too horrified to move. He tried to destroy my life's work, I said quietly. He tried to steal my money, and he was going to walk away, all while pretending to be a loving, supportive husband. Diane's sobbing grew louder. You married me. I said to Tristan, because you thought I'd always be beneath you, because you thought I'd never be a threat. And when you found out I'd built something you couldn't control, something you couldn't take credit for, you decided to destroy it. Harper, you didn't love me, I said. You loved the idea of me, the version of me that made you feel superior. And when that version disappeared, you tried to destroy the real me. He put his head in his hands. I was scared, he whispered. So you tried to steal it first, I said. The room fell into silence. Diane was crying quietly now, her hands covering her face. Robert was standing at the head of the table, his arms crossed, staring at his son like he didn't recognize him. Jessica was looking down at her plate, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. And Tristan was broken. I'd destroyed him. Publicly, completely, irrevocably. And I felt nothing. No guilt, no pity, no regret, because he'd tried to do the same to me. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing they needed to hear. One more truth that needed to come to light. I looked at Diane, whose face was still buried in her hands, and I felt a cold certainty settle over me. There's one more thing, I said quietly. The room went still again. About the woman. I continued my voice, even who raised the man who just tried to destroy me. Diane's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face pale. Harper, she started, but I held up a hand. No, I said. You don't get to stop this now. I turned to face her fully. You want to know how Tristan became the kind of person who sabotages his own wife? I asked. You want to know where he learned that it's okay to tear someone down to make yourself feel bigger? Diane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Let me tell you, I said, about the woman who taught him that lesson. I took a breath, steadying myself, because what I was about to say would cut deeper than anything I'd revealed so far. It wasn't just about Tristan's betrayal. It was about the cycle that created it, the pattern that had been passed down generation to generation until it landed on me. And I was about to break it. For a second, no one moved. Then Diane stood. Her chair scraped back hard enough to crack against the baseboard behind her. Every eye in the room turned. She was shaking hands clenched at her sides, jaw-locked skin flushed to the roots of her silver blonde hair. Enough! Her voice tore through the room like a whip. This is my house, my table, my family, and I will not sit here and watch some outsider tear it apart in front of guests. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I'd waited 8 years to hear her crack. Outsider. I repeated quietly, setting my glass down. That's the word you used at the wedding, too. Remember, you told your sister I wasn't from your world. Diane's nostrils flared. You have no right. I have every right. My voice was calm, surgical. Because you built your entire identity on keeping people like me beneath you, on making sure I knew my place, on reminding me every single day that I didn't belong. Robert stood now too, one hand raised. Harper, that's... Sit down, Robert. I didn't look at him. My gaze stayed locked on Diane. You want to talk about family legacy, fine. Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about where your mother-in-law came from. Diane's face went white. Harper, Tristan's voice low, urgent. I ignored him. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and spoke directly to Diane. Tell them, I said softly. Tell them about the restaurant. The room had gone silent, so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking 3 chairs down. Diane's lips parted, but no sound came out. No, I tilted my head. Then I will. I turned to face the table, the cousins, the neighbors, the Morrison and Blake partners who'd flown in from Dallas, all of them frozen forks halfway to their mouths. Diane Thornton. I said clearly, grew up in Waco, Texas. Her father drove a delivery truck. Her mother cleaned houses. Sound familiar? A few people shifted. Someone coughed. When she was 22, she got a job as a hostess at a high-end steakhouse in downtown Austin, the kind with white tablecloths and a wine list thicker than a phone book. It was 1985. She worked nights and weekends, saving every dollar she could. I glanced at Diane. Her hands were gripping the back of her chair so hard her knuckles had gone bone white. The owners were old money, a husband and wife team who'd inherited the place from his father. They treated their staff like furniture. Diane told me once years ago, before she decided I wasn't worth talking to, that the wife used to snap her fingers when she wanted Diane to refill a water glass. She never learned Diane's name. She called her the girl. Diane's mouth twisted. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. My voice didn't rise. You were 22, working 70 hours a week, and they treated you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter, like your dreams were too small to count. I let the words settle. Diane quit after 2 years. She enrolled in night classes at UT, worked as a legal secretary during the day, and met Robert at a firm charity event in 1989. They got married in 1990. She became Mrs. Thornton. She got the house, the name, the status she'd been chasing since Waco. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. And the first thing she did, I said slowly, was turn into the woman she used to hate. Diane's breath hitched. She married into power. I continued, and spent the next 35 years making sure no one else could. She built walls. She made rules. She decided who belonged and who didn't. And when her son brought home a guidance counselor whose parents were immigrants, whose father drove a truck, whose mother cleaned houses, she saw herself, and she couldn't stand it. Diane's eyes were wet now, but her voice was venom. You think you're so much better than me? You think your little company makes you... No. I cut her off. I don't think I'm better than you, Diane. I think I'm exactly what you used to be, and that's what you can't forgive. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jessica was crying softly into her napkin. Tristan stared at his plate. Robert stood frozen at the head of the table, one hand still raised, as if he'd forgotten how to lower it. One of the Morrison and Blake partners, a woman in her 50s with a steel gray bob, set down her fork and pushed back her chair. I think we should give the family some privacy. She stood. 2 others followed. Within 30 seconds, half the table had emptied. Diane sank back into her chair, face in her hands. I stayed where I was, spine straight, hands folded. Robert finally spoke, his voice hoarse. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I said quietly, I did. Because the truth was, this Diane Thornton had spent 40 years running from the girl who got called the girl. She'd buried that version of herself so deep she'd convinced herself it never existed. And when I walked into her house in 2017, 27 years old, hopeful, grateful, in love, she saw that girl again. And it terrified her. So she did what people do when they're terrified. She tried to erase me. She tried to make me small, to keep me in the kitchen at the far end of the table, out of sight and out of mind, to remind me every single day that I was the help, the outsider, the girl. But I wasn't. I was the woman who built a $180 million company in a public library while her son tried to destroy it. And now, sitting at her Thanksgiving table, I watched Diane Thornton realize that the girl she'd tried so hard to bury had just taken everything she'd built and burned it to the ground. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then looked at me. It's your lawyer. I nodded. Answer it. He hesitated, then swiped the screen. Hello. A pause. Yes, this is Robert Thornton. Another pause. His face drained of color. You're sure when... He lowered the phone, slowly staring at me. What? Diane's voice was barely a whisper. Robert's hand was shaking. That was Harper's attorney, he said. He's filed a motion in Travis County Family Court. Tristan's being served with divorce papers and a restraining order effective immediately. He's also notifying the Texas State Bar of potential ethics violations related to the sabotage. Tristan's head snapped up. What? No, that's... And Robert continued, his voice hollow. Harper's lawyer has filed motions in Travis County Family Court. Multiple motions. He's requesting emergency hearings for asset protection and requesting full financial disclosure from Tristan regarding any attempts to devalue marital property. The room went completely still. I sat there, hands folded on the table, watching them process what I'd just done. Behind me, I heard Diane's voice, raw, broken, furious. She can't do this, she can't. But I already had. I stood slowly, picking up my purse from the back of my chair. The papers will be served Monday morning, I said calmly. Tristan, you'll be notified by the State Bar within the week. The emergency hearings are scheduled for December 5th. My attorney will be in touch with all the details. I looked at each of them in turn. At Tristan, whose face was white as bone. At Diane, whose perfect composure had finally shattered completely. At Robert, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 2 hours. At Jessica, who was still crying quietly, mascara streaked down her face. I gave you 8 years, I said quietly. 8 years of trying to belong. 8 years of making myself smaller so you'd feel bigger. 8 years of pretending I didn't matter. I paused. But I did matter, I said, and now you know it. I turned toward the foyer. Harper, Diane's voice cracked. I stopped but didn't turn around. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. I looked back over my shoulder. Yes, I said, it is. And I walked out. Robert's phone rang again. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then answered. His voice was hoarse, exhausted. Yes, this is Robert Thornton. I stayed where I was, standing near the doorway, coat in hand. I'd been about to leave, but something in his face made me stop. What do you mean they moved up the closing date? Robert's tone sharpened. That wasn't in the contract. He listened, eyes narrowing. Paid full asking price in cash. A pause. His jaw tightened. A Delaware LLC. What's the name? I spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. Sinclair Holdings. Robert froze mid-breath. His gaze snapped to mine. Into the phone, he said slowly, I'll call you back. He ended the call and lowered the phone to the table. His hand was shaking. What did you just say? I took a step forward, calm, deliberate. Sinclair Holdings, I repeated. The Delaware Limited Liability Company that purchased this property 2 weeks ago. Diane's head jerked up. She'd been sitting in silence, face still pale from the dinner table revelations. Now her eyes locked on me, wide with confusion. What property? I met her gaze evenly. This one. This house, the Thornton estate. The silence that followed was suffocating. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. Tristan was still seated at the table, hands flat against the wood, staring at me as if I'd just spoken a foreign language. Jessica had gone perfectly still, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Robert's voice was barely a whisper. That's impossible. No, I said quietly. It's not. I walked back to the table and set my coat over the back of a chair. I wasn't leaving yet. Not until they understood. Robert, I said, addressing him directly, you've been in financial distress for months. Jessica's legal fees drained you over $200,000 and climbing. You needed cash fast to avoid bankruptcy. Your attorney advised you to liquidate assets, so you put this house on the market in late September. His face was gray. Sinclair Holdings made an offer. I continued. All cash, full asking price, 10-day closing. Your lawyer reviewed everything. It was clean legal and exactly what you needed. The only thing you didn't do was ask who the actual owner of the LLC was. Robert's eyes flickered with recognition. Sinclair, he said slowly, your maiden name. Yes. I nodded. I used a Delaware LLC to maintain privacy. Perfectly legal. Your attorney signed off on it. The title company processed everything. The deed transferred on November 7th. You've been paying rent since November 1st. Diane's voice cracked. Rent? Market rate, I said. $8,000 a month. The lease your attorney signed on your behalf runs through next June. Robert sank into his chair, one hand over his face. I was drowning, he said hoarsely. I didn't have a choice. Desperation makes people careless. My tone was measured, not cruel. I understand. I've lived 8 years desperate for your family's approval. Diane stood abruptly, chair screeching back. Her voice was shrill, disbelieving. This is our family home. It was, I said calmly. Now it's my investment property. Tristan shot to his feet, fists clenched. You can't do this. I turned to him, and for the first time all night, I let him see the full weight of my anger. I can, I said coldly, and I did. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. Jessica's voice was small, trembling. What happens to us? I looked at her 29 years old, Instagram influencer, real estate agent facing 4 lawsuits and a license suspension. The golden child who'd been handed a studio while I worked in a public library until midnight. You can stay, I said. If you sign a formal lease agreement and pay market rent, $8,000 a month. First and last month due by December 15th. If you don't, you have 60 days to vacate. Diane's face went white. You're evicting us. I'm offering you a lease, I corrected. Whether you take it or not is your choice. Robert's voice was hollow. Where did you get the money? I smiled faintly. It wasn't a kind smile. Pathways Series B closed in October, $45 million. I took a small distribution as founder and CEO enough to secure a loan for this purchase. The LLC holds the property. I hold the LLC. It's all very straightforward. You planned this. Diane's voice was shaking with fury. You planned all of this. No, I said quietly. I reacted. You spent 8 years making sure I knew I didn't belong here. You gave Jessica a guest house for Instagram videos while I begged for a corner to help students. You let your son sabotage my company because you thought my work was just a hobby. You treated me like I was invisible. I stepped closer to the table, hands resting on the back of a chair. So I built something you couldn't ignore. And when you tried to destroy it, I made sure you'd never forget me. Tristan's voice was raw. This is revenge. No, I said, this is consequence. I picked up my coat and slung it over my arm. The lease documents are with your attorney, I told Robert. You have 2 weeks to decide. If you choose not to sign, I'll list the property for rent on the open market. There are plenty of families in Austin looking for a place like this. Diane's hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. You're taking everything from us. No, I said softly. I'm giving you a choice. Sign the lease, pay the rent, and you can stay, or leave. Either way, you'll finally understand what it feels like to be powerless in someone else's house. I turned toward the door. Harper. Robert's voice stopped me. He sounded older than I'd ever heard him. Why, I looked back over my shoulder. Because, I said, for 8 years I sat at the far end of your table and pretended I didn't exist. I made myself small. I swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every reminder that I wasn't good enough. And all I wanted was for you to see me. My voice didn't waver. Now you do. I walked out into the cold November night and closed the door behind me. The porch light flickered, once then went dark. Inside, I heard Diane's voice, sharp and desperate. Robert, do something. But there was nothing left to do. I stood on the front steps for a long moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling the weight of what I'd just done, settle over me like a cloak. Diane looked as if the floor had vanished beneath her. Tristan's fists were clenched so tight I could see the tendons in his wrists. Jessica was crying again, softly, hopelessly, and I realized something. This was power. Real, undeniable power. Not the kind that came from a title or a last name or a seat at the head of the table. The kind that came from control, from choice, from the ability to decide what happened next. For 8 years, they'd held that power over me. Now I held it over them, and I was going to use it. I didn't leave right away. I stood in the doorway, coat over my arm, and watched them. Robert slumped in his chair, face buried in his hands. Diane gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Tristan, frozen jaw, clenched eyes, burning with something halfway between rage and disbelief. Jessica crying softly into a napkin, mascara streaking her face. They looked like survivors of a car crash. Diane's voice broke the silence, raw and trembling. "Harper, please, you can't be serious." I turned back slowly. "Completely serious." My tone was calm, measured. "But I'm not cruel, so here are my terms." I set my coat down on the back of a chair and stepped closer to the table. They all looked up at me, wary, desperate, waiting. First, I said, "Tristan moves out of our apartment by Friday, all of his belongings. I'll have the locks changed on Saturday." Tristan's head snapped up. "Harper," I held up a hand. "I'm not finished." He shut his mouth. "Second, divorce papers will be filed this weekend. My attorney already has everything prepared. You'll be served on Monday morning at your office." His face went white. "Third," I turned to Robert and Diane. "You can stay in this house if you sign a formal lease agreement and pay $8,000 per month. Market rate for a property of this size and location. First and last month due by December 15th. Lease runs through next June, renewable at my discretion." Diane's hands were shaking. "Harper, we can't afford—" "You can." My voice was firm. "Robert still has income from the firm. Jessica has her real estate commissions, assuming she keeps her license. You'll manage, or you'll move." Robert made a choked sound but said nothing. "Fourth." I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "No contact with me unless you can treat me as an equal. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. If you need to communicate about the lease or legal matters, you go through my attorney. If you see me in public, you nod and keep walking. You don't get to pretend we're family anymore." Jessica's voice was small, broken. "We are family." "No," I said quietly. "We were related by marriage. That's not the same thing." Diane tried again, her voice desperate. "We made mistakes, Harper. We did. But we're still family. Surely we can work through this." I cut her off. "Family doesn't sabotage each other." I said each word sharp and deliberate. "Family doesn't dismiss each other. Family doesn't make their relatives work in public libraries until 11 at night because they're not important enough to use a guest house. You didn't treat me like family, Diane. You treated me like hired help." She flinched as if I'd struck her. Robert's voice was hollow. "What do you want from us, Harper?" I turned to him. "Nothing." The word hung in the air. "I don't need your approval. I don't need your money. I don't need your validation or your acceptance or your love. I just need you to leave me alone unless you can treat me with basic human respect. That's it. That's all I'm asking." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jessica spoke again, voice trembling. Will you ever forgive us?" I considered the question. For a long moment, I just looked at her 29 beautiful crying into a napkin embroidered with her own initials. The daughter who'd been given everything and had never once thought to share. "Maybe," I said finally, "years from now, if you prove you've changed. Not through words, through actions, through showing me that you understand what you did and why it was wrong. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting Jessica. Even if I forgive you someday, I will never forget." Tristan stood abruptly, chair scraping back. His voice was strained, almost pleading. "We can fix this. Harper, please. We can go to counseling. We can work it out. 8 years, that has to count for something." I met his eyes, and for the first time since I'd walked into this house tonight, I felt something close to pity. "Tristan," I said softly, "you tried to destroy my company. You called 8 schools pretending to be a concerned parent. You fabricated safety concerns. You researched how to devalue my business so you could divorce me and claim half of what I'd built. You didn't just lie to me, you tried to steal from me. My voice didn't rise, but every word landed like a hammer. There's nothing to fix. He stared at me mouth open, and I saw the exact moment he realized I meant it. I picked up my coat and slung it over my shoulder. I'll send the lease agreement through my attorney, I said. You have until January 1st to decide. Sign it and stay, or don't sign it and leave. Either way, I need an answer by the 1st of the year. I turned toward the foyer. Wait, Diane's voice cracked. Harper, wait, please. I stopped but didn't turn around. What happens if we don't sign? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Then you have 60 days to vacate, I said over my shoulder. And I'll list the property for rent on the open market. There are plenty of families who'd love to live here. I started walking again. Harper. This time it was Robert. His voice was thick, defeated. I'm sorry. We're all sorry for everything. We should have treated you better. We should have seen... I stopped at the edge of the dining room and turned back one last time. You're not sorry, I said quietly. Not yet. You're scared. You're panicking. You're trying to figure out how to survive this. But you're not actually sorry. Not in a way that matters. I looked at each of them. Robert, Diane, Tristan, Jessica. The family I'd tried so hard to belong to. You'll be sorry. I said, when you realize what you lost. Not the house, not the control. Me. You'll be sorry when you understand that I would have given you everything, my loyalty, my work, my love, if you'd just treated me like I mattered. My voice didn't waver. But you didn't. So now you get terms, and rent, and distance. And I walked toward the foyer, footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor, leaving them sitting in the wreckage they'd created. For 8 years, I'd been invisible in this house. Tonight, I made sure they'd never forget me. I made it as far as the foyer before Diane caught up with me. Please. Her voice cracked behind me. Don't leave like this. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. Like what? I asked quietly. Like this. She gestured helplessly at the empty hallway, the closed dining room door, the ruins of the night scattered behind us. Angry. Hurt. Like we'll never fix this. I turned to face her. Diane, there's nothing to fix. There's only what happens next. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, her hands trembling at her sides. I was you once, she said softly. I know how it feels. I met her eyes. No, I said. You were never me. She flinched. When you were mistreated. I continued, voice steady. You survived by becoming the abuser. When I was mistreated, I survived by becoming successful. That's the difference between us. Diane's face crumpled. I'm sorry for everything, for all of it. I believe you, I said. She looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. But apologies don't erase 8 years, I said gently, or the 30 years you spent doing to me what was done to you. The hope died. Behind her, Tristan appeared in the hallway. His face was pale, jaw-tight, eyes red-rimmed. Harper, he said hoarsely, please don't go. We can... Goodbye, Tristan. I didn't let him finish. My attorney will be in touch. He stopped as if I'd struck him. Jessica appeared next, mascara-streaked shoulders hunched. She looked like a child. I'm sorry, too, she whispered. For everything. I didn't know. Yes, you did. My tone wasn't cruel, just honest. You knew, you just didn't care. She started to cry again. I looked at her, 29, beautiful, lost, and felt something soften in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to compassion. Jessica. I said quietly, you have a chance to live differently than your mother. Don't waste it. She stared at me, mouth open, tears spilling down her cheeks. I turned back to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold November night. The air hit me like a slap-sharp, clean bracing. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to my car, footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. Behind me, the front door stayed open, light spilling out onto the steps. I didn't look back. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat for a moment in the silence. My hands were shaking. I gripped the steering wheel and stared up at the house, the Thornton estate with its tall windows glowing gold against the darkness. My house now, my investment, my leverage. For 8 years, I'd walked through that door hoping they'd see me. Tonight, I'd walked out knowing they never would. My phone buzzed. Riley, how'd it go? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Harper, better than expected. I'll tell you Monday. 3 dots appeared then. Riley, proud of you. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Then I started the engine and drove away. The streets were empty. Most of Austin was home tucked in with family finishing their Thanksgiving dinners. I drove past darkened houses and lit windows past the library where I'd spent so many nights hunched over my laptop while the Thorntons slept. I slowed as I passed it. The library was closed for the holiday windows, dark parking lot empty. But I could still see myself there, 31 years old, carrying a tote bag full of notebooks and a thermos of coffee, setting up at the same corner table every night from 7 to 11. That library saved me. Riley saved me. But in the end, I saved myself. I kept driving. 20 minutes later, I pulled into my apartment building. It was modest, 2 stories, red brick, nothing like the Thornton estate. But it was mine. I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and stepped inside. The apartment was small, a living room with a second-hand couch, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, no guest house, no ring lights, no marble countertops. But it was mine. I dropped my purse on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and pulled a frozen pizza from the freezer, my Thanksgiving dinner. While it heated, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. 3 unread emails. The first was from my attorney confirming that divorce papers would be filed Monday morning. The second was from the property management company, noting that Robert Thornton had requested the lease agreement. The third was from a mother in Dallas whose daughter used Pathway. The subject line read, "Thank you." I opened it. Dear Ms. Sinclair, my daughter is a sophomore at a Title I high school. Pathway helped her get into UT Austin with a full ride. You gave her hope when no one else did. Thank you. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. The oven beeped. I ate 2 slices of pizza standing at the counter, then sat back down and logged into Pathway's admin dashboard. Active users 52,847. Waitlist 5,012. I stared at the numbers. Somewhere out there, 5,000 kids were waiting. Kids like me, invisible, underestimated, hoping someone would give them a chance. I thought about the questions I'd carried with me all night. Would they change? I didn't know. I'd stopped waiting for answers. Would Tristan lose his law license? Still pending. The Texas State Bar investigation could take months. Did they sign the lease? Yes. Robert's attorney had called that afternoon. They'd agreed to all my terms. $8,000 a month renewable at my discretion, no contact except through legal counsel. Would I forgive them? No, not yet, maybe never. And that was okay, because here's what I learned sitting in my small apartment on Thanksgiving night with a half-eaten frozen pizza and a laptop full of emails from strangers who believed in me. Your worth doesn't begin when your family sees it. It was always there. They gave Tristan everything. The name, the connections, the guest house, the studio, the praise, the validation, the assumption that he mattered. They gave me nothing, so I built something they could never ignore. A company worth $180 million, a platform serving over 50,000 students, a future that didn't depend on their approval. And in the end, that was enough. I clicked on the waitlist tab and started reviewing applications. A 16-year-old in El Paso whose parents were farm workers, a 14-year-old in Houston whose father was incarcerated, a 17-year-old in San Antonio whose mother cleaned offices at night, kids who looked like me, kids whose parents looked like mine, kids who'd been told implicitly or explicitly that they didn't belong. I opened the first application and started typing. Somewhere a kid like me, invisible, underestimated, working twice as hard for half the recognition, was hoping for a chance. Time to get back to work. And to you listening to this story, remember this. I thought for years that if I worked hard enough, if I made myself small enough, if I prayed hard enough, God would soften their hearts. I believed that family betrayal could be healed with patience, and that family revenge was never the answer. But here's what I learned the hard way. Sometimes God's answer isn't changing them. It's changing you. He didn't give me their approval. He gave me the strength to stop needing it. Don't be like me. Don't wait 8 years hoping family betrayal will turn into acceptance. Don't stay invisible while others take credit for your light. And don't mistake silence for peace. Sometimes it's just surrender. God blessed me not when they finally saw me, but when I finally saw myself. He didn't deliver me from family revenge. He delivered me through it, teaching me that justice and vindication don't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes they look like boundaries. Sometimes they look like walking away. My advice: build your worth. Where God plants you, even if it's a public library at midnight. Serve the people He's called you to serve, even if your own family refuses to see it. And when family betrayal cuts deep, remember your value was never theirs to define. Family revenge didn't heal me, but reclaiming my voice did. So tell me, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever built something extraordinary while they dismissed you? Drop your story in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and finding your worth when the world tells you you're not enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And a gentle reminder, the stories ahead contain fictionalized elements designed for educational purposes. If this content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos that better suit your needs.